Intro, so Sean.
That's the eyebrows.
Oh, my glasses. Welcome everybody and everybody in the room to our virtual and in-person discussion with Professor Fred Hafferty. Fred's been at Melbourne for about a week, professor at the Mayo Clinic, and he can describe his role more broadly shortly, professor in medical education. And links in with one of the objectives of the Lyme Network in this context around professionalisation of the discipline and thinking through how we can get external experts to help us think around Indigenous medical education, student recruitment, minority admissions and so on. So Fred, it's been a great pleasure to have you in Melbourne for the last week. And this is the last of your contributions and this is your binational contribution. I note that we've got people online from New Zealand and from a range of places across the country, including Perth and I think Darwin. Fred's going to introduce some broad framing context for us to think about, but critically, the session is going to be more valuable to all of us if it's interactive. So have a play with your keyboards. You can talk privately to your friends if you push the private chat button, so be careful if you privately chat and then chat to everybody. But again, in terms of the interaction, I'll be monitoring what questions people want to ask. So if you have something particular to ask Fred as the discussion's going on, put it in your keyboard, it'll come up and then we can prioritise which bits that we'll pass on to you, as well as other broad comments. But Fred's very keen that this session is interactive, lots of discussion. He has some cases that we might get to discuss and talk about, as well as some other bits and pieces. So welcome, Fred, and thank you for your generosity of doing so much while you've been in Melbourne with us.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you for everybody in the room and for everybody that's online. As Sean mentioned, it's been a week since I've been here. It's been a great opportunity for me to expand my learning horizons, and so I want to particularly thank Sean, also Jeff McCall, and ultimately the Cohorts Nations for the opportunity to be with you all here today. So as Sean mentioned, the title of the discussion is Admissions Criteria as a Driver of Quality in Medical Education. It was something that Sean came up with. I'm not an educationalist per se, and so this was one of the more challenging topics for my visit here. This is my disclosure statement, and Mayo Clinic requires that I do a disclosure statement anytime I open my mouth. I almost feel like I should be doing it on anytime I talk to somebody on the phone. This is my home at Mayo Clinic. Sean mentioned that I'm a professor of medical education, but my seat home, if you will, where I spend my time is in Mayo's program on professionalism and ethics. The two individuals down at the bottom of the screen, Michael Brennan on the left is the director of the program, and Linda Matty is his administrative partner. The program on professionalism and ethics is what Mayo calls enterprise-wide, meaning that it has involvement in everything that goes on at Mayo, both Mayo Rochester, Mayo Arizona, Mayo Florida. Those are the three main campuses. There's also something called the Mayo Health Network, which is a variety of clinics and hospitals around Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, and beginning to broaden out into the Dakotas, et cetera. So anything that has to do with issues of professionalism and ethics, either educationally or remedially, runs through this program, and I'm an associate director of the program. Just by way of background, since I thought that it would be, I don't know, some Minnesota-centric if I didn't at least try to explain Minnesota, where's Minnesota? Not that anybody should really know, so at least on the screen, there's the state of Minnesota. Where I had been, and will be relevant in a second, for the past 30 years, you see the very westernmost tip of the upper lake, that's Lake Superior. The westernmost tip was Duluth, Minnesota, and I was at the School of Medicine in Duluth for close to 30 years, and then moved down to southeastern Minnesota. If you think of Minnesota as having a little bit of a foot stretching east, and that's where the Mayo Clinic and Rochester is. I'm thrilled to be here for a number of reasons, one of which is it's summer here, it's winter in Minnesota, and this is an aerial shot of the Great Lakes. Again, the westernmost tip of that lake at the top. The lake at the top is Lake Superior. The westernmost tip of that is Duluth, and this is what the lake looks like right now. It's completely covered with ice, and you don't go out in it, I guess, except if you want to go ice fishing or something like that. You can drill a hole in the ice and go ice fishing. Anyway, ice lasts quite a long time before it breaks up, so this is the shipping day, opening of shipping of last year, and you see the icebreakers and the cargo ships leaving the port. Duluth is the U.S.'s westernmost Atlantic seaport. So you can get to Duluth from the Atlantic going through the St. Lawrence River and the locks of the various Great Lakes. And it's quite an awesome place to live around. I'm actually on some level quite sorry that I'm still not in Duluth, because the lake can be either quite violent or antithetically quite calm. Same lake and same boat, and different Fred deciding to go for a little scull. And also quite beautiful in a number of different ways. There are caves along the shore of Lake Superior in Wisconsin, not all that far from Duluth. And in the winter, you can explore the caves on foot. In the non-winter, which is only about half a year, you can explore the caves in kayaks. And also, for those of you who have seen the Northern Lights, you see a lot of them in northern Minnesota, and that's quite beautiful. There's nothing like having grown up in the 1960s and then moving to northern Minnesota. Instead of having to see your light show at some rock concert, you just sort of sit back and there it is, playing itself out across the sky. It's awe-inspiring. This is just as a setup for the next two, is the back of our house. Quite nice when the sun is out, but this is the back of our house as of last Thursday. And it was starting to snow as I was getting ready to come here. That's our driveway. We were actually stuck in the house until the plow came and plowed us out so that we could actually leave the house. So I just wanted to sort of give you that quick background for among a host of wonderful collegial reasons, a sort of weather reason for why I was glad to be here. Oh, and finally, my family, number one son's on the left, and he doesn't normally dress up like that, but he had a concert, and then my wife and my youngest son. So I just, by way of background, and both in terms of the topic and also in terms of how I hope things unfold, is I wanted to give you a sort of a quick sense of my relationship to admissions and therefore why I've come to think certain things, as we talked about admissions criteria as a driver of quality in medical education. And then also the notion that I'm going to try to do some exercises both within the room here, but also with everybody online, to try to get a sense of where the group sits around certain issues, so that when we go to discuss those issues, we have some sense of the range, if it turns out to be that way, of opinions or positions about those issues. I find it very helpful to me, at least, to know that with respect to a certain issue, and I will give you an example in just a second, that there can be a diversity of opinions about that. So we're going to do a range of what I wind up calling index card exercises. So by way of background, I'm now on admissions. For about half of the time that I was in Duluth, I did admissions work. And that was either in one of two camps. Either I was a member of the admissions committee interviewing students, applicants, and then voting on those with other members of the committee around their desirability for the school. And then for a couple of the last years that I was involved, I did screening, which basically meant I read everybody's file. I had, back to the title of our talk, I had criteria that I was to use to screen students either in or out for the pool that would be used for the interview pool, basically. So we might have 2,000 applicants with a goal of interviewing somewhere around 400. So basically that meant that 1,600 applicants wound up on the floor, so to speak. And although the criteria were independent of the results were very, meaning how many people were going to get interviewed and not. The results still drove the process. Now, another piece of information that I think is going to be relevant as I ask questions of the group, Duluth had a very specific admissions criteria in terms of the product that it wanted to turn out. And this was a state sanctioned, meaning the state of Minnesota sanctioned. Duluth was in the business of recruiting and training future family practitioners, specifically future rural family practitioners. And so most applicants coming to Duluth, and again, a piece of information that we're going to circle back on with respect to your missions and your applicants, most people applying to Duluth knew that we were in the business of training rural family practitioners. And so they came saying, I want to be a rural family practitioner. I love cows. I love farms. I love anything rural. And some of them went to pretty interesting lengths to do this. I've never forgotten a particular young man. Everybody had to present on interview day, had to come with a photograph that then went in their file. And this young man came for his interview. His photograph had himself sitting on a tractor. I mean, it wasn't a headshot. He was sitting on a tractor, and he had his niece and his nephew with him. I guess that's the family message. And please, I'm not trying to sound or be sarcastic, that's just descriptive. And then he wore a cow tie. So it was a tie with cows on it. And I suppose that was another rural message, and that I suppose, to be impressed about all of that. So that's kind of my background with respect to the committee. That's kind of my background with respect to Duluth. And by all means, feel free to ask me any questions about Duluth or my role or anything as we go along. I really do want the session to be interactive. But I want to, as a first step, and an index card exercise. So if I can, oh, thank you. If I can just, we have here in the room literal index cards, but if everybody would grab, that's online, would grab a piece of paper, it would help you to work out some of these, and then as best you can, chat your answers back into Sean, and we'll collect them all and do a summary of that information and get that information back to you. We're probably all going to need, during the course of things, probably 5 or 6 index cards, so that we'll hand them in one at a time and keep on working. What I'd like you to do with your index card, and again, back those online, just a piece of paper or something, but this is visual. I want you to draw a line. And anchor it with 2 dots or 2 X's, whatever, but have an anchor. And these anchor points are absolute points. And oh, yeah, thank you. No, this doesn't have to be quite. And if you would anchor the left side of the line with an A. And that A is going to stand for absolutely. And then the anchor on the right side of the line with an AN for absolutely not. And if you would, just do a vertical little notch line in the middle. That way we can get a sense of where people's X's are going to go. And in this case, we're asking the question, does admissions criteria, it's our topic, admissions criteria as a driver of quality in medical education. I mean, and the word A is important here, a discussion, but the question for you is, does admissions criteria function as the most important driver of educational quality and reform in medical education? Thinking now of your absolutes. Absolutely yes. It is without question and far and away the most important driver of quality. Other extreme, absolutely not. Maybe even has nothing to do with educational quality. Admissions criteria has nothing to do with educational quality. Again, mark your X. Where on this continuum of absolutely couldn't be more important? It is the most important thing. Criteria. Admissions criteria. Absolutely not. Nothing.
So the question to type online here is, does admissions criteria drive educational quality? Is admissions criteria the most important driver of educational quality?
So thank you for the question. So we just changed the title of the talk a little bit from A to the driver. And, you know, just again, just a line and wherever you think the X, your X is, and then if we could hand the cards in to Warwick, what Warwick's going to do is summarize everybody's X's, put it up on the board, and then we'll figure a good way of transmitting the information on the board to everybody that's online.
So that you know, Fred, what we're doing online is we're modifying it slightly to a like-it scale of 0 to 10.
Yeah.
0 is absolutely, 10 is absolutely not, and people are giving me a number shortly.
Okay,
please.
great idea.
Is admissions criteria the most important driver of educational quality?
Yeah.
But no numbers are coming in yet, except from Christchurch.
All right. We'll wait just a second to see what comes in, but Warwick, you can start putting up the group here. We don't have all the data up yet for those of you who are online, but I'll tell you ahead of time, I'm thrilled. There's some variability, and nothing gladdens a heart more, at least my heart more, than variability of data.
So, 5, 6, 3. Which one? 10 is absolutely not. Okay. 0 to 10.
All right, we're putting up, right now we're putting up the online data too. No, because basically, and hypothetically, if everybody said that admissions criteria has nothing to do with driving the quality of medical education, then that will swing our discussion off in one direction. Whereas if everybody had to say that it had if everybody had to say it was the most important thing, it would take us in an entirely different discussion direction. So we all set with that?
Yeah, that's what.
Okay. So is there a good way now?
So I've typed back to these guys what
Yeah.
the responses were. If you want to do a visual, that's fine.
If this doesn't come too well with the reflection from the windows, that's all.
Just take a photo and hold it up.
Sorry, I'll
Yeah,
just
look through the webcam. Let you know how to.
Does that look good?
You can get a rough idea of it.
Okay, so that's a rough idea of the discussion, with a couple of people having a moderately enthusiastic yes, and then a couple of folks 50-50, and then the others more on the not side. Okay, second question. And we'll go through maybe the 3 or 4 of these again to get a framework for where everybody is. As Sean knows, I like to live in the space between formal things and informal things. So the next question asks you to draw a distinction between admissions criteria and admissions practices, or how work is actually done in your experience within the doing of admissions work. And it's literally the same question. It's just shifting the word around. Again, the same A on one hand, absolutely absolutely not. On the other hand, the work of it, the doing of admissions, the work of admissions, the practices that go on in admissions committees are the most important driver of educational quality and reform in a medical school. First question asked about criteria. Now we're forgetting about criteria and we're talking about how admissions committees actually go about the work that they do. Is this the most important driver? The most important driver, again, from absolutely couldn't be more important to absolutely not, including the possibility that the work of admissions has nothing to do with educational quality. Basically, just for those of you online, we're just waiting to get the data up on the whiteboard. And thank you for getting that information in. Work, you wanna show the group, and then basically I'm gonna make a small comment with an underlying sense of glee. Oh, this is cooler than cool. And then I'd like to, before I ask any more questions, just open it up to both the group here and online with a very non-specific, what do you think? What I'm seeing here, just gut level reaction, is that we think of, if we're going to think of one thing as driving quality in education more than another, it's criteria. The actual work, where we're sliding a bit more, how admissions committees actually operate, we're sliding a bit more away from quality and more towards an absolutely not direction. So thoughts. I mean, this is, what do you think's going on here?
Committees can follow instructions.
Committees
follow instructions.
They do follow instructions, or they don't?
They do.
Committees follow instructions, okay? And I'll try to repeat things. If anybody's not hearing any of the, anybody online's not hearing any of the conversation, let Sean know. And
Yeah, okay, I'm listening.
oh, okay,
2 mics here, so.
okay, thank you.
I actually made the committee slightly more important than the criteria, because the committee generally makes the criteria, right? So the driver of student success comes more from the committee and what they put in the criteria than the other way around.
Okay. What do the rest of you think about
I
this?
see it quite differently. The admissions criteria and the admissions committees in general are filtering mechanisms to get rid of the large numbers of applicants to get down to a small number of applicants. So most of the applicants could do the job anyway, could get through the course. So they're
Well, that's
actually,
why I've still had them both towards that end of the
Yeah.
scale.
so they're not actually serving a role, from my perspective, a role in quality of medical education. They're serving a role of stopping the flood so that you've got a number of people you can work with.
I mean, we've got a provocative, thank you, David, we've got a provocative statement on the floor. I have an opinion about that. But what do the rest of you think? I know how I felt when I was doing admissions work. And
That's the most important thing. Is it that important? What's important?
I went from thinking, this is me now, I went from thinking, and particularly my first year, I mean, I couldn't sleep at night, worrying about the kinds of decisions that I was making about, you know, how people got ranked and how I presented my interviewees to the group. It was awful because it's high stakes type of thing. And over time, I became more, I don't know what, immune to those thoughts. And I started moving a little bit more, or maybe a lot more, towards David's position of how do you take this number and reduce it to this number? And that was my job, not finding the absolute best applicant.
And so that's reflected on, can I just, as a process thing, if you're in the room, can you just say who you are before you talk for the people online that can hear you but can't see you? But secondly, some of the comments online reflect that Fred, Lilon never short of a word, whether it's on written or in person. Thank you, Lilon. She says she agrees it's to reduce the number of applicants and to stopping the flood. Although that's Sydney, however, as a graduate program, they also use it to test whether or not students have sufficient academic tertiary level study skills to cope with the course. And Robin suggests that the criteria needs to work to enable us to select students who are best suited to the course.
I'm gonna try to keep an eye. So we're going from sort of 1 to 3, and I've got a case study that has to do with assessing who's best to do the work, and the way that we, when I was on admissions committees, did that. And I'll just raise the question that I'm not sure how good a job we were doing in weeding those who could versus those who couldn't. But it'll take about a half hour to set up.
Yeah, so there's another comment that follows up with that from a couple of people across the country that then suggests that we should be selecting students who are best suited to being the sort of doctors we want, not so much as to how they cope with the course. So I think from a health workforce perspective, health needs perspective, or the kinds of doctors we want, rather than how well they're going to cope with the course, and then thinking through what that might mean about what the course actually is.
I would like to think that that is the most rational and option, the nicest way to frame things. But I'm thinking back to our work on admissions committee, and admissions committees were made up, and I don't know about your admissions committees, but our admissions committees were made up of basic scientists and clinicians and 1 or 2 people from the community. And the clinicians, a smaller number than the basic scientists, were very much would talk about this applicant will make a good doctor. But that was a kind of statement that was really made by the basic scientist. I think in part out of maybe intimidation. On what basis would we say would make a good clinician? But I would like to think that that would be the kinds of criteria that would be used, and then how those criteria operationalized. Other thoughts or comments? I don't want to jump too far ahead.
So Tricia Murray from Academic Programs and Policy Unit. Because I'm not an educationalist and I'm academic, so I'm on the professional side of things. I'm a little bit to the left because I do the selection of the committee and I do the screening, so obviously I think my role is important. But I guess, if we don't think selection criteria have an impact on quality educational outcomes, why don't we have a ballot system or a lottery? I don't know, doesn't that happen in some countries where they have lotteries for medical places? Is that true?
I don't know.
I'm thinking that happens. I think it's in
Meaning,
Scandinavian countries, I think they have the lottery to get a medical place.
so once you've satisfied some basic requirements, then everybody else.
Papalangi Reid from Auckland. I think that the unspoken links that we haven't really talked about is the fact that we were talking about a quality medical education. So what are the drivers of quality medical education? And before that, when you introduced yourself, you talked about the guy on the tractor.
Yeah.
And so that was really about, I suppose, purpose, built for purpose. So where the product is purpose driven, the product, the graduate. So we can all agree with my cynical colleague Dave here, in that you make some rules and everyone goes like hell gaming to get themselves through those rules, and you're sitting there with, doing sheep like a sheep gate like this, letting sheep go to the left or the right. But shouldn't we think about, does that make the medical education element easier or harder? Or who are we making? Start again. So what does that mean for quality medical education? Surely it has to be, who do we want to be graduates? And therefore, so what raw materials do we need to start with, and what does the quality medical education program have to do to turn them into widgets, turn the widgets into doctors? So then we can, if we believe that we had good doctors at the end of it, and that we had evidence that these were the necessary starting point, because this was the best medical education program that we had, then what are the raw materials? What do the students look like that we take in? So I think I'm trying to get to the point that the quality medical education is a bit of an important thing, because as you intimated, the biomedical science, the basic scientists want people who know a minimum basic science, so they can just top up and polish, and the clinicians want people who are going to be good doctors, so they can top up and polish, and the community people want ones that can actually talk to people, so that they can still be humans at the end of it all. And so we've all got these slightly different slants, and it's tempered by the fact of what does the quality medical education program in the middle of it mean? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
There was a bit of a rave, sorry, but so we're looking at the students coming in, the applicants, but and does that shape the process in the middle? Medical education. Because can we turn the guy on the tractor into someone who's really interested in rural family medicine?
And is good at it.
And is good at it.
My inclination, but I'm saying this in part for discussion purposes, is no. what we're hoping is that the guy on the tractor comes in with enough of the right stuff, whatever that is, to survive whatever we do educationally. And then the end product is something that we can stand up and wave a flag about. But that the people coming in, the aggregate, that I'll just call it the educational folks are looking at that and saying, all right, here's what we've got coming in, and here's what we need to do educationally to take this and take it to a new level. Sorry if I'm off camera.
It's scary, but you could.
I didn't see that. I'm sure, well, I'm not sure. I'm not speaking empirically. I would like to think that it's going on in certain schools, that there's some kind of rigorous evaluation of what has come in through the admissions process. And then these folks, they maybe overlap, say, what do we need to do to move them from here to here? Do we have the quality? Is the medical education engine that good that it well, let's go back to, we'll try another question. We'll go back to Sean's 0 to 10. If this group is a 5, where can medical education drive us? Good medical education, quality medical education. Take us to a 6, to a 7, to an 8, to a 9. 10's as good as you can go. What do you think? And we're positing that it's good medical education. That's the given. And the groups coming in midline, how much punch is delivered by this vector? What do you think?
I think it depends what is the measure, what are you actually measuring as the quality? Are you measuring the end of course percentage marks, or a whole other range of measures that gives an indication of a quality practitioner? And medical schools actually look at, most of the time, how many got over 70% or 80%, or what was the mean or of their marks. And so they've done a good job, rather than are practitioners good at working with people and don't make them sicker, but hopefully make them less sick.
All right, so here's the next index card question. It won't be a scale type of thing. It'll be a word or a description. And I don't know how best to put this up. Maybe we can just write the words on the board. What is in your medical school, whatever medical school you is, because I'll show you what it is from mine, or what it was. I do have a slide about that. We just have to jump ahead a little bit. What is the first indicator of quality of your medical education that pops up? The first one that everybody looks at and says, are we doing a good job or not? I hope that makes sense. Does it make sense as a question? I mean, at least in the US, and at least about the school where I was admissions, there is an indicator. Everybody looks at it and goes, are we doing a good job or not? This is, yes, we are, no, we're not. So what's it for you? I can tell you what it is for me.
Us personally, or what we know of the medical?
From your school, What's the first thing that the school as a whole looks at to say, we're in trouble, or okay, we're through this one? Because, you know, medical schools jump through hoops too, you know, just like applicants. So what's the first hoop that a medical school needs to look good on, or at least not look bad? And I'll give you my answer, but what is that? And work and collect them. And if you all online can type in the first big criteria that's used to judge the quality of your education. Not what it should be, what it is.
You're talking about the graduate, the doctor, him or herself, or the institution?
What's the first thing that the school looks at? Not the individual person to say, oh, I'm doing well or I'm not, but the school looking at its class of students. Maybe while, are we getting answers in from
Yeah,
online?
we're getting answers in, but to be fair to people online that don't want to reveal all of their view first, I'll type this list up as well.
Okay,
But accreditation is one.
okay. Now, mentioning accreditation, if a school is doing well in the US, it gets accredited once every 7 years. I think that's around that. So there's something else that gets used on a more regular basis than accreditation. Okay. We'll give everyone a quick.
I'll type them up here, you don't need to.
Okay.
I'll read it anyway.
That's good. Anything more coming in?
Well, Tim says it's a hard question. He wants to say things are actually really hard or impossible to measure. Others say students passing all of first year.
Okay. All right. And this is not a critical comment. It's not intended as a critical comment. It has nothing to do, as far as I'm concerned, with what's hard to measure. It's just what is used, whether it's valid or not.
Someone else says it might also include the number of grads working in rural and remote areas.
Okay, that's pretty far down the line. In terms of having to wait for that kind of data, I'm going to find, yeah, that's it. Part 1 of the national boards, and I'll explain that in a second. In the US, and these are real data from one school. In the US, there are 3 national tests. There's one that takes place at the end of year 1. No, at the end of year 2, excuse me. And then at the end of year 4, and then at the end of the first year of residency training, so graduate medical education. And it can be broken. This is from step 1. And here's where a school will say, how are we doing? And also the faculty within that school are saying, how am I doing? Or how are we doing if it's a team course? So who's breathing easy at this particular school? Or easier? Behavioral science. Now, nationally, it's doing average. You know, who might have to explain himself or herself to the dean? Yeah, I mean, for sure, biostat. You know, and remember, this isn't an absolute metric. This is relative placement. So you know, somebody has to be at the bottom and somebody has to be at the top. But you know, how do I want to say it? Medical schools are like Garrison Keillor and Lake Wobegon, where all children are beautiful and above average. You know, how does everybody get to be above average? Well, everybody wants to be. And so I can't imagine a dean not looking at that and saying, how do we get our scores up? And that's the metric of educational excellence. Educational excellence results in higher scores. Now, whether that's true or not is a whole nother matter, but that's our first thing. And just to be even more specific, because it's kind of a very unusual situation in the US, the NBME, National Board of Medical Examiners, who provides these tests, is a private company. And medical schools, US medicine contracts with them to do these tests. And medical schools who, and not all do, but medical schools who require, for example, that students pass part 1 of the boards before they go into their clinical years, that's a school requirement. That's not a national board requirement. National board just gives the exam and scores them. Schools do with the data what they want. But the prevailing historically response has been, because there's a passing cutoff, and that you have to score above that before you can move on to your clinical training. Anyway, thoughts, comments, questions? But that sat over me for decades.
So one of the questions online is are patients or local community involved in the meta that you're talking about?
Patients? No. Let's go back a step. I remember I said that there were members of our admissions committee from the community. Nothing we've got to write down on the card, but we'll do a poll here, and if people would respond online. For your medical schools, does the public participate in the development of admissions criteria? I'm getting a couple of no's, 1 yes.
The rest of the question, does the public
Participate in the development of admissions criteria. It's not the same thing as being on the admissions committee. And if not, why not? I mean, if the end product is to be a good physician, and part of the notion of what a good physician is should have, and I'm making a bunch of shoulds here, should have some input from the public. Why doesn't the public participate in the criteria development for who should get into medical school? of and apart from decisions about admissions committees and interviews and all that kind of stuff. But David, you had shook your head yes. Can you describe how that happens?
It's a very small school, so it's got quite a active role with a small number of people in developing criteria for selection, and it encompasses a range of different tasks and criteria, and community are involved in not all of the tasks, but in of the development of the criteria, but certainly some of the development of some of the key criteria, because there's three main criteria: scores, interviews, and filling in a bit of paper with a story. So they get created and ranked differently depending on who's involved in the decision-making process and the development process from time to time, because they get reviewed on a regular basis. So community are actively involved in that, representatives of the community. Not just approving what they're given at the meeting.
What would, for those of you who are nodding no, and again, would love to hear from folks online, what would be the pushback, if any, if you went forward to your faculty and said community members should be involved in helping to develop admissions criteria?
History, logistics, admissions is so contentious that everyone wants to keep it very tight, so that would be the excuse.
And which members of the community to choose.
Yeah, well, there's none of the logistics.
The online responses are sort of a yes, but straight off to that question. A little bit, maybe a little bit more on interviews rather than the criteria themselves, although some feedback from doing the interviews for community who they might ask about criteria. But to represent a range of views, it's more a yes, but, and some no's.
I mean, is there, I don't want to sound like I'm putting words in anybody's mouth, and I don't think in this case I am, but would faculty say some version of what do they know?
The other online discussion here was about from maybe some people who do some clinical work or used to, that patients don't really know anyway. Or what patients think are a good thing might not necessarily be a good thing, apropos over-servicing.
Okay.
And then there's the other view, which is a suggestion from someone that they have community reference groups who think they might have input into the admissions criteria, but they actually don't.
Okay. I mean, that's always something of interest to me. Again, the formal, all right, on paper, something exists, but then how it actually plays itself out can be quite different.
The list of topics, if you like, in that list there that the board assesses medical schools on, if you were a member of the community, you'd feel very intimidated trying to comment on the suitability of a med school's contribution in those spaces. There's nothing there that relates at all to doctor-patient relationship or, you know, how empathetic a doctor is, nutrition, genetics. They would feel completely out of place. So I'd expect you'd get that feedback, what do they know, from the community members as well as from the medical school, because if that's what the assessment criteria are based around, there's no space for a community member.
I suspect, but don't know, that when you get to part 2 of the boards and part 3 of the boards, you'll see other types of metrics. But, you know, we're still in the world, in spite of more clinical exposure early on, et cetera, we're still in the world, I think, of assessment where it is basic science assessment and therefore basic science readiness to go and tackle this other thing. Because, yeah, in the list, I mean, just a copy of a list that I saw that went around for one particular school. And yeah, there's nothing on there. Sure. This may wanna get us charged up a little bit and ask you off of a story, another aspect of admissions as we try to take a look at this difference between criteria and practice, which ultimately is what I'm interested in. But I'm certainly willing. Anybody have any others, please direct the group. When I first went up north to Duluth, and I was a brand new medical student. I was a brand new medical faculty, and this is all 30 years ago. And one of the first people to greet me was the director of admissions. Welcome, love to have you on board. Would you be on the admissions committee? And I thought, oh, well, thank you very much, but maybe I should just get my feet on the ground a little bit, learn a little bit about the school, learn a little bit about me and the school, see how I might progress from being a raw faculty to somebody who might actually secure tenure after, you know, a certain period of time. And then I came to learn more about the whole admissions process. And so it's time for another index card exercise for you. So grab a card. And one of the things that I came to learn in Duluth was that there were some faculty that were quite interested and excited in being involved in admissions. And there were other faculty that weren't, didn't want to be involved in admissions, thought that it ate up too much time, that it would get in the way of research, it got in the way of teaching. So our line. And as a generalization, and remember the endpoints are absolute, in terms of faculty participation on admissions committees, left-hand point, hiding in closets, H will be HIC, hiding in closets. And the right one, pounding on the doors, POD, I want in, I want to be on the committee. Other end, like I said, you can't find them. You have to go beg people to be on the committee. I don't know, maybe you have to, what's the word I want? Reward people to be on the committees. What's the experience in your medical school? Where faculty in general, where are they along that line? Are they hiding in closets? Are they lining up outside the admissions committee office saying, I want to be on the committee? What are you doing?
with another rule.
And while work is putting this up and while we're getting information from offline, we'll throw one more piece of information for work to deal with as a second question. But now going back to the quality of medical education frame for this talk. So I'm looking for a word or short phrase. If you could select one thing, one admissions criteria to serve as the driver or champion of quality of medical education, what would it be? If you could select one only, admissions criteria that would serve, regardless of whether you thought it would or it wouldn't on the previous questions. But if you could pick one to serve as the driver or champion of quality in medical education, what would it be? One. We'll put the list, everybody's list up in the bullet. I'll give you my answer. That's going to be a list for that second question, the one factor.
Oh, the one, sorry, I missed it.
Is it a factor of the institution or of the individuals, applicants?
I didn't think that far ahead. Or, I'm not that savvy. What do you think it should be?
I was thinking more in terms of the applicants.
Okay, one criteria. Yeah, I mean, I think that was probably my intent.
You read that. That's
Okay. I mean, you would, you can add me. That was my experience. Just, I mean, that's why the director of admissions was coming to me in my first week of my job. I mean, she was looking for bodies. And it didn't make any difference that I didn't have any experience with the school or no real sense of how important rural primary care was or how I might react to a picture of somebody sitting on a tractor with two small kids or anything else. Needed bodies. In part, I think, because there was no real penalty for somebody to avoid it. And there was no real benefit except doing a sense of doing a good community service type of thing for those who did it. You know, there was no bump in salary or anything like that.
And the online responses around faculty participation was much more, in fact, neither closets or door pounding, but many appointed positions that you can't run and hide from anyway, unless it was perhaps around rural when lots of people are really interested in being involved in their area, perhaps their area of interest. I can't necessarily read between all the lines on here. And in terms of criteria, engaged, committed and motivated students who want to be good doctors with a extra comment that says good luck measuring that. Another driver of quality was social accountability, so students with an agenda around social accountability. Altruism, and I think that might be able to measure that more effectively than engaged, committed, and motivated.
I was jumping among topics. Something, Sean, that you just said that I'm actually going to sort of email back up. You know, I haven't been in Duluth in 4 or 5 years, and I haven't been on admissions in probably 7 years. And so many things could have changed in that time. But most of the time that we were doing, that I was doing admissions work was pre all of this, web connections, email, you know, everything. It was all pre-internet. And so the notion, and you said it, and it just sort of ricocheted off my head, the notion that we would have a rural anybody, rural community members, rural physicians participating on admissions couldn't happen. Because by definition, criteria, so we'll go back to admissions criteria, by definition, Duluth, the medical school considered Duluth not rural. So anybody who came to participate on the committee that was not of the medical school was a non-rural person, including the community members. Because how do they get there? I mean, unless they were going to drive for an hour and then turn around and drive home for an hour. So I never thought about that before. Now maybe technology could help change that, but right now, but when I was there, that wasn't the case. And I just had never bothered to think about that before. So my email back to my old haunts will be something along the line of, you know, is something like this possible? Where you could, because it's technology, more directly involve individuals who actively participate in the kinds of community structures, blah, 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 that we say we want to send our graduates out to. That would be fantastic. Oh, how cool. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, it just never occurred to me. I mean, and have you typed out the list from the factors?
Yeah, which was around social accountability,
Okay.
Engaged, committed, motivated, altruistic, with some participants agreeing.
Oh. I told Warwick I'd write down one for this. I had it in mind or I answered my own question as I wrote out the question. I'm probably much too harsh, but I think of quality in medical education as hiding behind homogeneity. And if, you know, it's at all possible to get a bunch of folks that are a lot like each other, then it lowers the, I don't know what, lowers the threshold for how hard you have to work for quality. But if your student body becomes truly diverse, whatever that means, if a school doesn't respond in terms of trying to develop a better educational engine, I would feel pretty bad about that. But that was what went through my head. I don't know what well, Your thoughts, what do you think? I'm talking too much.
I think it's something that in Indigenous student space, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and or Māori in different contexts, we haven't necessarily had much of a discussion around the relationship between admissions or presence and the influence on curricula. Yet if we talk individually amongst ourselves, I think we've all had experiences that we could describe where the quality of the curricula, either in its representation or its approach or its standpoint, has been influenced by the presence of Indigenous students. So I think it does challenge the faculty to teach better and differently in our context that we're talking about. And I think that that's a context that's applicable more broadly. The example that you and I were talking about a few days ago, if you took it out of this particular Indigenous or minority example, is around women's participation in medicine and in medical education, and how that may well have influenced how certain bits of medicine were taught.
I think an interesting thing that came up when we were looking at our reinvigorating our curriculum was the whole thing about secular and non-secular. So we say, you know, we're not non-religious or whatever, and yet some people wanted to put in about spirituality and as part of learning to be a good doctor was actually being in touch with some level of spirituality, and they wanted the Indigenous people team to get on board with this because, according, you know, we're deeply spiritual beings in touch with the whole universe. And I don't mean to sound sarcastic, but it was quite interesting that some of the elements around humanity and what, for want of a better word, spirituality is now being discussed about, are we secular or non-secular in our curriculum? And that's, I thought that was quite an interesting thing to have a little scrap about as Board of Studies, as a curriculum board. No, it's not. Or not, maybe.
But I'm a dean, and you know, I have to meet periodically with other deans. And I mean, I don't know how often your deans meet, but you've got, what, 21 schools? So you meet, you talk. And I understand there's a certain penchant for saying we're number one, or for somebody saying we're number one or I'm number one. But going back to one of the comments at the table about the National Board of Medical Examiner scores, the thing is still up there on the screen. I probably should move it on so that it doesn't burn a hole in my screen. But I don't, just for discussion's sake, I don't see anything in here about spirituality, or I don't see anything in here about whatever. And I know at the end of the day, I'm going to be judged by how well my students do, or my students do, on whatever metrics you all have. I know about this one here. If I was in the US, I might think, well, yeah, it's good that we have these things, but as long as they don't take too much time away from what I'm really getting assessed on. Because I'm getting assessed on this too, not just the students, who, by the way, also know that this is the most important thing. So they go into part one of the boards in their heads going, the anxiety level goes up, And they're quite concerned about the boards, not just, this is a really weird part. Sorry, I'm digressing and I apologize. But, and maybe I've been digressing all along and I should apologize even more, but what are students getting so about? Because, 98% of them pass. Well, this is part one. We haven't got to part two or part three yet. Is most of their angst because at the end of the day, they love us and they're worried about us? Because, we're the ones that are kind of living and dying on this. Most of the students pass. They may not get the score that they want, or that they hope for or something, but they'll pass. But we are above this line, below this line, or all that kind of stuff. I think we do a great job. I haven't ever thought about this before. I think we do a great job of communicating to students just how important they're doing well on this test is for us. And that's a good part of the...
So the response to you singing, Fred, is that they're singing high notes because we, the medical schools, pick people who are driven, who have an element of global anxiety disorder, which is not, or if at all, poorly managed. They don't feel confident that they will pass.
And what, okay, no, let's follow that down. So what's the blip when I say to a student, stop worrying. You have a 98% chance of passing. Do they not believe that? That's my question. Do they not believe that the facts?
I think we could put, I don't not talk on your behalf, Paparangi, but in an Australian context, you might think that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students are fearful of not passing for a whole range of historical and quite legitimate reasons in and around access, entry, role models, no long history of being in the academy in any way, shape or form. So I think that there's a cohort of students which might actually be quite different about that.
Okay. Yes?
And some of the stuff coming through online is to think through about for students who don't have quite the same educational opportunities, and in our context, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, how do we think about the possibility of a pre-medicine program that strengthens their science skills? Or how, as some schools are doing it, they've found they've had success with students with limited science background, and it's getting them through first year. Once they're through first year, they're all on the same page. So some particular, which you won't necessarily need to be familiar with, challenges in a historical context.
What do you all think?
So, Colin Belhap Deacon, I think that's a really interesting point, and it sort of makes the case that too much of the medical education is based on the knowledge base, and that it would be much more sensible to have a more balanced set of criteria that aren't so dependent on these knowledge-based subjects. The difficulty with that, of course, which you also pointed out earlier when you're discussing, is that how do you measure those things? How do you measure altruism? And because it's incredibly difficult to measure, and it's much easier to measure genetics or understanding of nutrition, we fall very dependent on those levels of entry, and that's disadvantaging certain groups of students and potentially meaning we're missing out on good, empathetic, diverse doctors as a consequence.
Reactions, responses?
Maybe we should send all the science nerds to do a degree in the humanities to level the playing field.
So these would be applicants or faculty?
Well, you know, I'm thinking of Audrey Lord's words, you know, the master's tools can never dismantle the master's house, sort of thing. So we have a predilection to recreate the medical workforce, just because we're built to maintain power. So we have to do something radical if we want to do something radically, get something radically different.
But in the Australian context, a lot of the applicants to grad medical schools do come from don't necessarily.
A lot. What sort of?
Well, I don't know, but the selection criteria don't require a high science degree in many cases. They get out of that through the gaps. I don't know if that makes a difference in terms of outcomes.
I have a bad hypothesis, but it might be, it certainly would be a researchable hypothesis. And again, I'm always thinking about the US context. And that is the less prestigious the school, the more concerned it is about its performance on these kind of national screens, and the more emphasis it gives to the biomedical sciences as an entry criteria. Schools that do well or have reputations or aren't as concerned about their reputations are maybe more adventuresome in that respect. But I'm thinking of one school in particular, and I'm thinking, boy, you know, just you know, if I added up the number of chemistry, biochemistry, biology, physics, etc. majors in a given class, it was 80%. Now, why? Well, if there was concern about how the school was going to operate in terms of its scoring profile, maybe would be less adventuresome in that respect. But that would be something that you could do as a study. There are the rankings, and then just you could go and find out what the majors were of everybody admitted in a class, and run that statistic. Be pretty fast. I'm just trying to figure out how to. I'm not sure which slide to rest on, just to get it off of the. Because some of these things I do think about. I'll tell you a quick story, and with no index cards coming afterwards or anything like that. I do worry that sometimes that admissions winds up being the fallback solution for all kinds of problems. So something crops up on the academic horizon, and the first order response is one, it's about students. It's not about the educational environment. And two, so let's see if we can fix it in admissions by recruiting or admitting better students, whatever that might be. And I've been in all kinds of conversations where somebody says problem X, and almost the immediate answer is admissions. We do admissions. This story isn't quite down that line, but it was a dean talking about not being altogether happy with scores, and that while this particular dean was not going to make any suggestions about changing admissions criteria or admissions requirements and what courses you had to have to come in, etc. This dean wanted to have all students take a course in time management skills. And this might help academic performance. I can use time management. I'm sure my work productivity would benefit from a time management course, but I consider that suggestion to be outrageous. That there's a problem with scores, so the solution is to do something to students without ever considering doing anything with the educational environment, what faculty might do, or anything. Time management, that's the answer. I won't try singing again, I'll just sigh. As a general course, I tend to worry about admissions being a default solution to a whole range of problems. And that it's not my default criteria. Here's the last thing I worry about. And I worry about this regardless of the criteria used or whatever metrics winds up getting associated with those criteria. And the problem for me is going to be typified by this example, but the problem is in a world of science where scientists know the difference between descriptive and inferential statistics and what those mean when it comes to admissions, they go brain dead. Sorry, they're not able to differentiate between descriptive statistics and inferential statistics. So here's my story, and I'm raising the story just to raise the point that regardless of what numbers you wind up coming up with as admissions criteria, numbers attached to criteria, what winds up getting done with the numbers can be a maddeningly different thing. So, all right, let me find out where I'm supposed to be in all of this, because we're pages ahead of where I was. All right. Yeah. Okay. Now, since I'm on record as having said this in my own school, I'll be specific that this what I'm about to say is about my school 7 years ago. We had a variety of ways of scoring people. And at one point in time, everybody, now this is the voting. So they're up for the vote. 0 to 10. You could vote, shouldn't be accepted, to must accept. How did we actually vote? I can't remember what I have up here. That's how we voted. 7 to 10. 7 meant don't admit. 10 meant admit. Now, do you think that you could get, do you think that you could get a group of scientists to say, all right, we operate with a 4-point scale. So let's just make it a 4-point scale. Let's make it 1 to 4. Let's make it anything, but that's what we do. So let's do it. No. No, no, no. We're going to operate with a 4-point scale, 7 to 10, because, and now this is my interpretation. What I just told you is fact, because I went and said, come on, we're just doing 4 points, let's do 4 points. my interpretation is that if you had a candidate that you really didn't like, 3, 2, once in a great while, somebody would throw in the curveball number and knock them down. Okay, so the result was that with this 7 to 10, 90% of our applicant pool had scores ranging from the mid-8s to the mid-9s, 8.5 to 9.5. And so we had Sean, that was your score. And that was a better score than 9.1200. A candidate who, Sean, would get in instead of Warwick, who has a score of 9.1200, because that's a better score. But scientists believe that. I'm sorry. There's no difference in those scores. They aren't. But we're going to go worse. Okay. In the US, applicants take the MCAT score, the MCAT test, Medical College Admissions Test. And they're in the process of changing it right now, but let's just say there's 3 main scored areas of biology, chemistry, physics, and then there's a writing score that nobody ever used, so it's now being dropped, and other things are being added in. So you can have a total score ranging anywhere from, I can't remember how low, up to, I think it's in the 40s, because at least 2 of those 3 areas have upper score of 15, and I think the 3rd area might have an upper score of 13 or something like that. All right, but the scores are in standard error units. So as we're reading here, score, by virtue of the fact that the scores are standard errors, reported as standard errors, anybody's score plus or minus 2 points has a 68% confidence interval. You're 68% sure that the individual's true score, ability, if you will, falls within plus or minus 2 points. So if they have a 25, you're 68% sure. What did I have here? All right, so there is a total score of 23. Confidence interval runs from 21 to 25. And that's how you interpret it as an inferential statistic, and allows you to use confidence intervals. So you have examples like this, and this is in one of the official handbooks that describes, from the AAMC, that describe how you think about scores. So here are 2 individuals. One has scored, what does it look like, a 23, and the other has scored a 26. And officially, is there any difference between those 2 scores? And the official answer is no, because the confidence intervals overlap. And the next example in this handout, here's an example where the confidence intervals don't overlap, so you are so there is a difference between examinees C and D. But this is one standard error unit, 66%. I jumped ahead and I apologize. I wanted to ask you one other index card question, which I'm not going to ask you now, but I want you to think about it. When clinicians do diagnostic work, there's something, at least in the US, they would talk about a thresholds for decision making. How sure do you have to be before you intervene, do surgery, or that you don't intervene? You say, oh, I'm sending the patient home. What's your diagnostic threshold. So my question to you ahead of time was going to be, what's your personal decision-making threshold when you're doing your admissions work? How sure do you have to be that candidate A is better than candidate B? 25% sure? Type 1 error rate of 75%. 50% sure? Flip a coin? 60, 70, 80? What is, how sure do you need to be before you say this person's getting in and this person's going home? And let's make it even worse. They're never going to get into medical school. So I wanted you all to write down a number because of where we're driving next. This standard error unit is for 66%. We're 66% sure that, and figure 4, that candidate C and candidate D are different. What happens if we go back out to be 97% sure that they're different? And you have to add on 2 more points on either side. And they overlap again. And now they're not different. Their ability is the same in terms of standard error units. You actually have to go, I calculate, no big deal, but I calculated out for 97% confidence interval, you have to go 20 and 28 before you get confidence intervals that don't overlap. And then you can say, I'm 97% sure that examinee D, higher score, is a better performing student than C. But that's not how we operate. If you have a total score of 27, that's better than a total score of 25. Period. But that's not true. And there is no way that I've been able to take a group of scientists who do this kind of work all the time, because I've tried. I've done it in a seminar session. Doesn't work. So I'm just throwing this out as, and again,
there's a question online that might be relevant, therefore.
Please.
This part of the
Thank you.
discussion, which was your example when you opened up that discussion nearly 2 hours ago, which was a comment that we've got about 5 minutes left. You talked about the use of photographs.
yes,
In the admissions. And
Yes.
the question is, how does that add to your data? In what way is it used? And how does it add to data? And is it?
honest answer, I don't know. Clearly the applicant thought that it would give him a higher rural profile. I think what we were supposed to do was, because we had the file with us when we did interviews, so this person, that person, it's like when I came through customs, my picture had to be matched up against the picture on my passport. I am who I say I am. But this just became another opportunity for an applicant. I thought it was funny. It was like, the tie was a bit much, but I rather liked the picture. But officially, it plays no part. But again, the difference between a formal,
I can be pretty confident that I like someone or I don't like someone, or I warm to someone or I don't warm to someone. I don't know. That's why I was linking it to your confidence.
Yeah.
Because it's qualitative versus a quantitative approach to.
Why do we need the picture other than, because we're not decide. I suppose the Office of Admissions would be the one to say, oh, here's the person coming in, here's the picture we have of them. They are who they say they are. Interviewee, you don't need to see anything at all. And we didn't see a picture until the day of. But I'm also reminded out of this question, file, open up all kinds of information. What was the one thing that I saw when the file was closed before any other piece of information? I'm asking it as a quasi-rhetorical question. What do you think was on the staple to the cover of that folder? Their MCAT scores, right there. Before I open up to read their personal statement or anything else, remember now I'm doing that screening. I have that folder. First thing, and the first line of my scoring sheet for the screening I'm to write down the MCAT scores. And on that basis, although I'm supposed to read the full folder and I'm supposed to give everybody a full and fair evaluation, which should take about 20 minutes. I've got 2,000, 3,000 of these. Will they be able to do the work? Yes or no? Very symbolic, I thought, of the importance attached to one thing. But I'm back again. I'm sorry it's late. I was ultimately frustrated, and it sort of was a wake-up call for me that regardless of the metrics that were specified as criteria, they were going to be used however they were going to be used. That's a vague statement, but how things got used were not what the criteria were. And it went so far as to have faculty who should have known better and who did know better in their work as scientists treat standard error data as if it was standard deviation data, even when they were told they were wrong. And I think there are a lot of extraordinarily well-qualified applicants who were treated as having lower scores when the official statement says they're not lower. But they were treated as such. 26 is a lower score than the 28. So, closing questions. I mean, we're coming down. I tend, and I apologize, to be a person who is, you would have been much better off if my wife had given this talk. She is a wonderful lady for whom the glass is always half full. And as such, keeps me chugging along, because I tend to be a person for whom the glass is half empty. And then I get infuriated about certain kinds of things, and then I get kicked off committees. But I do wonder and worry, one, ultimately, about the difference between criteria and their application. So what the criteria are versus how they're used, and then in some cases just how they wind up being abused, all for the purpose, I think, of saying no to certain applicants who would make wonderful doctors, but never get the opportunity.
So is there any last closing questions from the room, or I've asked people online, and there's been a couple, but any last questions before we wind up?
I think that a lot of us spend a lot of time looking at how do we get people in, particularly Indigenous students in, when the metrics that are applied don't apply for their particular situation, because the metrics are geared at filtering out the large number to get down to a small number. And in Australia anyway, we've got a very small number of Aboriginal students or Indigenous students who will be able to pass, but don't meet the metrics. So we have to have an alternative entry process, and then you're setting them up to be viewed differently, if you like, by the rest of faculty, because you've got all these high achievers, high scorers getting in, and these other group of students who are equally capable and end up to be very good doctors, but don't have the high scores and have got in differently. So you're actually creating a situation where people are being judged almost before they come in as not being good doctors.
Or perhaps even problems in my class.
Yes.
Golly gee, I do want students to do well, but I do have a lab to run to, and don't want to do too much remedial work. Thank you. Even if there's really no remedial work to be done, in my head, I imagine it. I just, I don't know how you're sticking with the very last topic. I don't know how your applicants are scored and the units that are used to score them. I would like that if I don't care which way the score is. Native American students get to 28, and a kid from Roseau, up in Minnesota, gets to 26. Same score. Okay, it doesn't have to be the reverse. That's and maybe more often than not, maybe it is the reverse. But I want admissions committees to say they're the same. Yeah, but they won't. At least that's not my experience with one group. Online questions?
No, it's 3 o'clock, and people will have other things committed to. We can stay and chat, but we might just wind up the formal part of our discussion with the online people, if that's all right with you.
That is certainly all right.
I won't jump back into the screen because that might be unfortunate for everyone, but thank you very much for your wide-ranging and well-researched and detailed presentation to us and discussion around the relationship between admissions criteria, admissions processes, and how that might drive quality curricula. It's given us a whole bunch of stuff to think about, with some of the offline comments to me about picking up some of the bits, further discussion with some of our meetings later on in the year. So thank you very much for it.
Well, thank you to everybody here. It wasn't as intimidating as I thought it might be. It's the first time I've ever done this kind of broadcast. I'm sure it'll come back to haunt me in certain respects, and but not here in the immediate room, so or the immediate online community. Thank you everybody for attending, and tomorrow I head back to -8. That was what it was this morning.
Cool. Yeah.